Hello and welcome everyone to our very last lesson of campCODE, and thank you for everybody who followed along all summer. And today we're going to be finishing off our final project, which is a space adventure game, and I'm going to be going through all of the code very quickly that we started last week, and we're going to finish off the coding for our last two paths in our adventure game today as well. So again, for anybody who has had any issues with the code, feel free to go onto my Scratch page and go through the code inside. Or also, if you need any personalized help, please let me know through email. I have my information linked down below, and I will try to walk you through as easily as possible, either through personalized video or even email, so whichever you prefer. So with that said, we have quite a big task ahead of us today, so let's get started by jumping right into Scratch. So you can see here I have Scratch open and I'm already signed into my page. At the top right, I'm going to go to my profile, which I have linked below in the description, and I'm just going to click on the project that we started last week, which is Scratch Lesson 9, Space Adventure Part 1. And you can do this as well if you didn't save your copy of the project last week and just work from here. So we're going to see inside of this project. We're currently on the project page. So at the top to the right, right beside the title, we have this See Inside button to go into our code. And here we have our project that we worked on all of last week. So here I'm going to first go into the file option and save a copy so that you're able to, so that the 9th lesson doesn't get overwritten for everybody. And I'm also going to change the title at the very top. I'm going to change this to Lesson 10, and it's going to be Space Adventure Part 2. So here is our code I'm going to quickly go over. First, we're starting off in a spaceship backdrop, and we have Kieran, our space explorer that I have selected, and this is her code in the coding area. So when the green flag is clicked, I'm going to make sure the backdrop is switched to this spaceship, and I'm going to go to our starting position, which is x negative 105, y 33. Then Kieran is going to introduce herself and say, "Hello, I'm Space Explorer Kieran. Where should we go on our space adventure?" Next, we made 3 different buttons by customizing our costumes for a regular button, and you can see that there are 3 buttons in the bottom. There's the go left, go straight, and go right buttons. So we have them coded right now so that when you click on any of these buttons, for example, I'm going to click on the go left sprite at the bottom. Here is the code for the go left button. So when the green flag is clicked for all of these different buttons, they're going to show in their positions that I initially want them to start at, and I have them all lined up along the bottom. Next, when I click on each of these sprites, so for this one, when the sprite is clicked up here, I'm going to switch the backdrop to a new backdrop, and they're different for all 3 of these buttons. Then I'm going to hide this button, and then I'm going to broadcast a new message. And this message I named left because this is the left button right over here. And when I receive the other messages, so when I receive that straight message for when I click on the straight button, or when I receive that right message for when I click on the right button, I make sure to have this hide. So all the buttons are hidden once I click on any one of them at the very beginning. So in Kieran's code, when I receive a message that I went left, for example, when I receive left over here, Kieran is first going to say, "What a cool empty planet," and then ask, "Who's this?" Or just say, "Who's this?" because then we're going to have our first encounter with our robot. So when you look into our plan, which is right over here, when we go to the left, we meet our robot, and he's going to ask us to help him fuel his spaceship. So now when we look into our code, I'm going to click on my robot's code. So at the very beginning, when the green flag is clicked, I make sure that the robot is hidden so we don't see him in our spaceship. And when we do receive that left message, first we have the robot waiting 6 seconds so that Kieran can talk. And then when she says, "Who's this?" we have it show up. So here's the show code right here. And we have it show up at a certain starting location, which is X99Y10. Then we have the robot say, "Greetings, Space Explorer, you came at the perfect time. I'm stuck on this space rock. I have lost all the stars that fuel my spaceship." And then the robot is going to ask, "Can you help me collect 10 stars to fuel my ship?" And then wait for us to answer. So if we answer yes, we have this if statement over here. And if we answer anything other than yes, the if statement is actually an if-else statement. So anything in the else area down over here is what we'll do. So if we don't say yes, everything in this else area says that we're going to say, or the robot's going to say, "Well, that's too bad. Goodbye then," and then switch the backdrop back to this spaceship that we started at, and then broadcast a message that we're going to call options. And it's called options because it makes all of the buttons that give us the options on which way to go show up again along the bottom. And then lastly, the robot's going to hide. So in our button codes, we have this when I receive options area here, this piece of code that says when I receive that options event or broadcast, then I'm going to show up again. Next, we have what happens if the user or the player says yes. So if answer is equal to yes, then this stuff in here happens. And we're going to broadcast a new message that we're going to call star collecting game. And then we're going to hide the robot. So when the star collecting game starts, we're going to try to catch 10 stars for this robot to fuel his spaceship. So first we added a star sprite right here. So this is the code for our star sprite. So when we start our game, we make sure that when the green flag is clicked, the star is hidden. And then once we actually receive that star collecting game message, then we have all of this code happening right here. So this is where it might get a bit tricky. So when I receive that star collecting game message saying that yes, we want to help collect stars, first we're going to make a variable that we're going to call score to keep track of our score because we need a score of 10 to help the robot. So we're going to set that equal to 0. Then we're going to show up. So we're going to show up in a random position. And we have this forever loop right here so that if we're ever touching Kieran at any time, then we're going to change the score by 1. So we're going to get 1 point and we're going to hide that star. Then we're going to create a clone. So we're going to make another star and then stop this forever loop. Also in this loop, we have another if statement that says, if my score is more than 9, so once I hit 10 and above, then I'm going to broadcast a new message that says finish star game so that we know that the game is now finished. And then we're going to hide that star and then stop this loop as well. But when I start as a clone, I have the code over here that is basically very similar to all of this code for when I first received that star collecting game message. And when I start as a clone, I'm going to show up again. You'll see here that I didn't put the set score to 0 piece of code in here because when I start as a clone, hopefully I already have a score of 1. So we don't want to start at 0 again every single time. We want to make sure that the score builds up so that it can eventually hit 10. We're also going to start at a random position. So the star is going to show up at random positions every time. And we have to catch it with Kieran. And we also have this forever loop right over here. So that if at any point you're touching Kieran, we're going to increase our score by 1. And then we're going to create another clone. And here is the difference between the two pieces of code as well. Instead of stopping the script, we're going to delete this clone because every time we start as a clone, we're creating basically a new sprite that you can't see in the sprite area. So if we ever start the game again, those sprites will all show up again. So we have to make sure to delete each clone once they are already caught by Kieran. Down here as well, if the score is more than 9, so 10 and above, then we're going to broadcast again that finish star game message. And we also have to make sure to delete this clone again, because that is our very last clone that we've made. We have to make sure that one gets deleted as well. So hopefully that part isn't too confusing, because we'll be doing something similar in our paths for today for our code. So I'll go over that one more time in a slightly different type of game today. Lastly, for when we actually finish the star game, so once we broadcast that message and have a score of 10, then I'm going to go into my robot here. The code for the robot has a reaction to when I receive finish star game. So the robot's going to show up again, say, thank you, that looks like enough stars to fuel my ship, and then hide. And we're going to switch the backdrop back to the initial spaceship backdrop, and then broadcast the options again so that the buttons show up on the bottom again. Also, in Kieran's code, when I receive the star collecting game, I want to be able to control where Kieran goes by having her follow my pointer. So during the star collecting game, first we're going to show the variable score. So we're going to have the score in the top corner show up. Also, we have this code that says forever go to mouse pointer, and this is the code that makes sure that we are always going to follow the mouse pointer and have Kieran go wherever that is. But when we finish the game, we have this code down here that says when I receive finish star game, then we're gonna hide the score. So once we're finished with the game, I don't want to see the score in the top corner anymore. So I'm gonna get rid of it. We're gonna go back to our starting position. So that's where the go to x -105 and y 33 comes up again. And we're going to stop all the other scripts in this sprite. So we're going to stop that forever loop as well. And that is all the code that we did last lesson. So now we're going to start by coding for the other two paths that we have in our state machine. So that would be the straight path and the right path that we have laid out over here in our state machine. So let's get started by coding for those. So starting from the very beginning, when I click on the green flag and have Kieran introduce herself, then I click on the go straight button after she asks us where we want to go on our space adventure. We get transported to this backdrop, which is our space city, and I believe that's Space City 1. So in our go straight code, we have it switch the backdrop to Space City 1, and then we have it broadcast that straight message. So when we get that straight message, we're going to go to the Space City, and then Kieran is going to say, wow, the big city. And then she's going to say, I think I see someone headed my way. So let's code for that first. So in our event blocks, I'm going to scroll down to when I receive, and I'm going to make sure that it says when I receive that straight message. Then I'm going to go into my look blocks and say, first of all, wow, the big city. So I'm going to replace the hello with wow, the big city for 2 seconds. Then I'm going to grab another say hello for 2 seconds block, and I'm going to say, I think I see someone headed my way. And I'm going to say that for 4 seconds. So now we have to add our sprites that Kieran is going to meet. So according to our state machine, we're going to meet Ripley and his dog Dot, and they're going to ask us to help them pack for a space adventure. So going back into our code, we're going to first add our sprites. So I'm going to choose a sprite on the bottom right. I'm going to search for space sprites. So here we see our first one is the dog Dot. So I'm going to click on Dot. And next I'm going to add our next sprite by choosing a sprite again, searching for space. And we see here that there is a Ripley sprite that we're going to use as well. And now I'm going to put them in their starting positions. So I'm going to have Ripley to the right and Dot on the path right in the middle over here. So let's code for these starting positions. I'm going to start with coding for Ripley first. And so in my event blocks, I'm going to grab my when green flag is clicked block, And so when the green flag is clicked, I want Ripley to be hiding until I receive that straight message. So in my look blocks, I'm going to grab my hide block. So when the green flag is clicked, I'm hiding. And I'm going to grab my show block for when I receive the message straight, which is in my event blocks down here, and drop down to when I receive straight. I'm also going to code for his starting position. So in my motion blocks, I'm going to grab my go-to block, go to x79, y35. And also, because I started my straight path with Kieran talking, I'm going to wait until Kieran finishes talking before my two sprites show up. So that took around 6 seconds. So I'm going to go into my control blocks just like I did with the robot, grab my wait block, put it right before my show block up here, and I'm going to wait 6 seconds until I show up. I'm going to do all the same code with dot. So I'm just going to click and drag my code that I want in dot's code as well into her sprite down here. So both of these I want to stay relatively the same, except dot's starting position I'm going to have to change because it's starting at a different position. So instead of go to x79, y35, like for Ripley, I'm going to change dots to go to x -20 and y -58. Next, I want Ripley to introduce himself. So I'm going to go to Ripley's code, grab a look block to say for a few seconds. I'm going to say, hello, I'm Ripley, and this is my space dog dot. So hello, we can leave that part. Hello, I'm Ripley, and this is my space dog dot. And I'm going to say that for 5 seconds. Then I'm going to have Ripley ask, we're getting ready for a space adventure. Can you help us pack? So I'm going to have him ask that. So that's a sensing block. We have our ask block. And we're going to change the question to, we're getting ready for a space adventure. Can you help us pack? Question mark, and then wait for our answer. So if we look at our state machine, we have the option of saying either yes or no, or something other than no as well. And if we say no, then we're going to go back to the spaceship. And if we say yes, then we're going to start an event called packing game. So let's code for all of that. So to code for the yes or no answer, I'm going to have to go into my control blocks and grab that if-else statement, just like I did for the robot. So in this case, we're going to put in our condition. So if the answer is equal to yes, I'm going to grab our equals operator right over here and change it equal to yes, and grab our answer block in our sensing blocks over here. So if our answer is equal to yes, then Ripley is going to say, great, let's head to my room. So I'm going to code for that by putting a look block in. Say, I'm going to change it to, great, let's head to my room. And have him say it for 3 seconds. And here we're going to have us all go to Ripley's room. So we're going to have to add another backdrop. So I'm going to choose a backdrop over here. We're going to use one of the bedroom backdrops. I'm going to use bedroom 3 right over here. So we're going to code for this backdrop change by grabbing our switch backdrop block, put it down here, and drop down to make sure we're going to bedroom 3. But if we say anything other than yes, Ripley is going to say, well, that's too bad. Goodbye then, just like the robot. So I'm going to grab that block and put it in the else area and have him say, well, that's too bad. Goodbye then. for 4 seconds. And then we're going to go back to our initial backdrop, which was the spaceship backdrop. So switch backdrop to, drop down to spaceship. I'm also going to make sure that Ripley disappears. So I'm going to grab that hide block. And then I'm going to make sure all of the options pop up again once we go back to the spaceship. So in the event blocks, I'm going to broadcast. So broadcast block. And I'm going to broadcast the message options. So drop down and select options. So when we go back to answering yes, Ripley is going to say, great, let's head to my room and switch the backdrop. But also we're going to start a new event. So I'm going to grab my broadcast block and we're going to make a new message. And the message this time is going to be called packing game. Just like we have in our plans. Click OK. So for our packing game, we're going to do something very similar to our get ready for school lesson that we did for lesson 8. And that is we're going to have 5 different sprites for what they need, or Ripley and Dot need, to go on their space adventure. And once we click and select all of the different items in the room, then we're going to click on Dot and they're going to get ready for their space adventure. So first, in Ripley's code, I'm going to grab that when I receive, and I'm going to drop down to when I receive that packing game message. Then he's going to say, I think I'll need food and clothes for my trip. So that's what we're going to have to find in our game. So I'm going to say, I think I'll need food and clothes for my trip. And we're going to say that for 4 seconds. Then I want him to say, click on Dot when you're done. So I'm going to say again, click on Dot when you're done. And we're going to say that for 3 seconds. Like so. So now we want Ripley to disappear so we have space to look for all of our items. So I'm going to grab the hide block. And also we want Kieran to disappear. So all we want is Dot and then whatever items we're going to choose for getting ready for the space adventure. So in Kieran's code, under the when I receive the straight message, I'm going to make another event. I'm going to add another event block. And that's going to be when I receive that packing game message. So when I receive the packing game message, we're going to have Kieran disappear as well. So hide right there. Next, we're going to have to choose all of the items needed to pack for the space adventure. So we're going to choose a sprite. And Ripley said that he needed food and clothing. So for food, I'm going to choose this apple over here. And then I'm going to choose another sprite. And I'm going to choose these bananas for food. So there's our apple and there's our banana in the preview window. Then I'm going to choose some clothing. So we're going to choose a sprite again. Under the fashion category up top, we're going to choose some pants. Like so. And we're going to choose another sprite. Under fashion, we're going to choose maybe some shoes. And we're going to, one more time, choose a sprite under fashion. And we're going to choose maybe a hat. And you can customize these. There are many different costumes for all of these. So maybe I want to choose a different hat. So I'm going to go into the costumes tab at the top left. And maybe I want to choose this cute bear hat right here instead. So those are all the clothes and food that Ripley and Dot are going to need for their quick space adventure. I'm also going to change the size of these fruit. So the apple is quite large right over here. So I'm going to choose a size of 50%. So I'm going to change that in the sprite area. And the bananas as well are quite big. You can see them hidden right over here. And I'm going to change that size to 50% as well. All right, so what do I want these new sprites that I just put in to do? Well, I want them to, when the green flag is clicked, so my event block, when the green flag's clicked, I want them to be hidden. So I'm going to grab my hide block. I want them to show once I receive that packing game message. So I'm going to go into my events. When I receive, put that together, and then I'm going to drop down to when I receive packing game, because we only want them to show up when we receive that packing game. And unlike in our get ready for school lesson, I'm going to have these appear at a random spot. So in my motion blocks, I'm going to have them go to random position when they start. So all of these items will be scattered in different areas every time we play this game. So here is all of the code that I want to duplicate in each one of these 5 new sprites that I made. So because I'm going to be using the same pieces of code so often, I'm going to put these in my backpack. So here's my backpack. It's currently empty. I'm going to fill my backpack with this piece of code right here, and also this code right over here. So now I have the 2 pieces of code I just made in my backpack, and I put it in there because I want to make sure that I have these same pieces of code in all 5 of my sprites. So right now I have it coded for the bananas. I'm going to click on the apple, and I'm going to drag and drop these pieces of code from the backpack that I just put inside and arrange them so that it's just much faster than having to drag them to the end. So for my pants, I'm going to do the same thing, drag and drop my first piece of code, then drag and drop my second from my backpack and arrange it slightly so we can see both of them. One more time for shoes. And rearrange it, and last time for the hat. So I'm going to put these last pieces of code in here. Like so. Then I'm going to have to create my list. So just like in lesson 8, when we created a list, so we made sure everything was packed, we have to do the same thing for this as well. So if you remember from lesson 8, our list blocks would be in the variables area here. I'm going to make a list, and this list I'm going to call my packing list. And click OK. So now we see in our preview window that there is an empty packing list up here. I want to code for all of these items so that when I click on them, I'm going to add that item to our packing list. So how I do that is under the event blocks, I'm going to grab this when this sprite is clicked block, put it here. And I'm going to go back to my variables area, and I'm going to grab the block that says add thing to packing list. And instead of thing, I'm going to say hat because I'm currently coding for the hat. And I'm going to make sure that I do the same thing for all of my different sprites, but instead of hat, I'm going to have whatever that item is called added to the packing list. So in my shoes, when this sprite is clicked, I'm going to add shoes to my packing list. And so I'm going to do this for pants, bananas, and apples as well. So I'm going to speed through this really quickly. You can see me doing it. So now I've added the same piece of code, but with a different name added to the list every time when I click on each of these sprites. So now what do I want to do? I'm going to quickly test out my code so far. So I'm going to push on the green flag. So here is our code from the beginning, and you'll see the packing list is still here. We can get rid of that just by unclicking on this little check mark beside the packing list block in our variables area. And so we're going to go straight this time. So I'm going to click on the go straight button, and she's going to say, wow, the big city. I think I see someone headed my way. And she's going to meet Ripley and Dot. And they're going to ask us if we can help them pack for their space adventure. And in this case, I'm going to say yes. We're going to go to Ripley's room. And he says, I think I'll need food and clothes for my trip. Click on Dot when you're done. So right now I have all of these items scattered throughout the room. We have the hat almost on top of Dot over here, which is very cute. And I'm going to click on these items. And so far nothing's happening. But if I check this packing list, you'll see that all of the items I clicked are now on this packing list. So what we need to do is we need to code for it so that when we click on these items, they're added to the packing list, and also they disappear once we click on them. So I'm going to grab my looks blocks, go to hide, and put that after I add those items to the packing list. And I'm just going to do that for all 5 of my items. Just add the hide block at the very end. So that they disappear when we click on them. So I'm going to click on the banana, the shoes, the apple, the pants, and the hat, and they all disappear. Also, just like in lesson 8, for our packing list, we have to make sure that we clear our list at the very beginning of the game. So I'm going to do that by going into Kieran's code. And when I receive that packing game, I'm also going to make sure that I delete my whole packing list at the very beginning. So I'm going to grab my block that says delete all of packing list and put it right here underneath the hide when I receive the packing game in Kieran's code. When we finish our packing, we are told to click on Dot. So we're going to have to code for what happens when we click on Dot. So right now for Dot's code, we only have it so that when the green flag is clicked, she's hiding. And then when I receive that straight message, we're going to wait 6 seconds and then just show up when Ripley shows up. But now we're going to have to grab our block, our event block that says when this sprite is clicked, we're going to have to check to make sure that the list is 5 items long. And if it is, then they can go on their space adventure and they're all packed. But if we have less than 5 items, we're going to have Dot think, something is missing, and we're going to have to continue looking for all 5 items. So when the sprite is clicked, if the length of the packing list is equal to 5, then we're going to broadcast a message that says finish packing game. So let's code for that. In my control blocks, I'm going to grab my if-else statement. And if the length of my list, which is in the variables blocks, we're scrolling down. If the length of packing list, this block right here, if it is equal to 5, so we're going to need an equals operator. Like so, to put into our conditions area. So if the length of packing list, which goes right here, is equal to 5, then we're going to have Dot disappear. So we're going to hide, and we're also going to broadcast a new event. So events, broadcast a new message, and we're going to call this message finish packing game. But if we don't have 5 items, if we're missing any items, so else down here, then we're going to have Dot think, so under looks blocks, instead of say, because space dogs can't talk, at least I don't think so. So we're going to grab this block, think for 2 seconds in here, and Dot is going to think, something is missing. So let's change the text in there. And we're going to think that for 3 seconds. So right now, let's test out our code. So I'm going to push on this green flag, and you'll see that Kieran is currently missing. And that's because we never put a show block after we hid from the beginning of our packing game. So in Kieran's code, when we receive that finish packing game message, we're going to have her show up again. So in my event blocks, I'm going to grab that when I receive block. And when I receive finish packing game, we're going to go to the look blocks and show again. Like so. So I'm going to click on that. So Kieran is showing at her spot. And when I push on the go flag, we have Kieran introducing herself and asking us where she should go on her adventure. We're going to go straight, and she's going to see the big city and meet Ripley and his dog Dot. And they're going to ask us if we're able to help them pack for their space adventure. And we're going to say yes. So we're going to go to Ripley's room to help pack. So Ripley tells us we'll need food and clothes for their trip, and they're scattered throughout the room. So I'm going to click and collect all of these items. So I'm going to click on 4 of those items, and when I click on Dot to be finished, because we don't have all 5 items, we're missing the bananas down here, it's going to think, something is missing. But once I click on the bananas, so we have all 5 items, and click on Dot, we're going to show Kieran again at the end of the packing game. Also, when we finish our packing game, I want Ripley to show up again. So I'm going to go into Ripley's coding area. I'm going to grab my event block when I receive finish packing game. And I want him to show. So on my look blocks, I'm going to grab the show block. I'm also going to have him say, thank you, that looks like everything. Time to go on an adventure. So I'm going to grab my look block that says, say for a few seconds. And I'm going to change the text to say, thank you, that looks like everything. Time to go on an adventure. And we're going to have him say that for 4 seconds. And after that, I want him to disappear again. So I'm going to hide him again. And we're going to move back to our spaceship. So change our backdrop back to the spaceship backdrop. And then broadcast our options again as well. So we get those options buttons back. So events, broadcast, and drop down to broadcast the options message. And Kieran should be back in our spaceship at the end of it. So here Kieran is back in our spaceship at the very beginning, and we're going to start coding for the write path. I'm not going to test our code. I'm going to do that at the very end because it is very time consuming to go through all of the text and we're running a little low on time. So right now when I click on the green flag, I have Kieran introduce herself, and this time we're going to go right. So where should we go on our space adventure? We're going to go right. And now that Kieran is at the right path, we have her going to this new backdrop, our city number 2. So when she reaches the city, I want to have her say, wow, it looks like I'm in a moon colony. I wonder if there's anyone around. And according to our plans, when we go to the right, we meet Monet the engineer, and she asks us to help her charge her robot helper. So going back to our code, first we have to code for when Kieran receives the right message. So we're going to go into Kieran's code. I'm going to place it right beside the straight message code. So to the right over here, in my event blocks, I'm going to grab the block that says when I receive. And I'm going to drop down. So when I receive the right message. And when I receive the right message, I'm going to grab my looks blocks, say hello for 2 seconds, and I'm going to replace that message with, wow, looks like I'm in a moon colony. And we're going to say that for 3 seconds. Then I'm going to grab another one of that same block and change the message to, I wonder if there's anyone around. And we're going to say that for another 3 seconds. And this is when we meet Monet, the space engineer. So I'm going to choose a sprite and we're going to add her sprite. So in my search box, I'm going to search for space again. And we see that here is Monet, the space engineer's sprite that I'm going to use. So I'm going to click on her and we're going to place her, she's in a good spot right now, to the right of Kieran, and we're going to code for her. So in the event blocks, when the green flag is clicked, I want her to hide because I don't want her showing up until I go on the right path. So hide. And then I'm also going to grab that show block and go back to my event blocks so that she's showing when I receive. So grab that when I receive block and drop down to when I receive that write message. So when I receive that write message, I want Monet to show up, but I also want her to wait a few seconds to let Kieran speak before she shows up. So the speech was around 6 seconds again. So I'm going to go into my control blocks, grab my wait 1 second block, put it before my show block because we want to wait before we show up. And I'm going to change it to wait 6 seconds. So when she shows up, I want Monet to say, "Hello, I'm Monet, the engineer. I hear you're a space explorer." And then I want her to ask us, "Would you help me fix my robot?" So first I'm going to go into my look blocks, grab my say hello for 2 second block, change the text inside to say, "Hello, I'm Monet, the engineer. I hear you're a space explorer." And we're going to say that for 4 seconds. And then we're going to ask something. So that's going to be back in the sensing blocks, the ask block right here. And we're going to change the question to, "Would you help me fix my robot?" And then wait for us to answer. So according to our plans right over here, we can say yes or no. And if we say no, we're going to go back to our spaceship. But if we say yes, we're going to start a new event that we're going to call the robot charging game. Going back to our code, we're going to add our if statement. So in my control blocks, I'm going to grab that if else statement like before. My condition in this case, again, is if my answer is equal to yes. So I'm going to grab my operator, my equals operator, and we want that equal to yes. And I'm going to grab my answer block so that if my answer is equal to yes, then I'm going to do whatever's in this first part of this block. But else, if my answer is not yes, so if my answer is no or anything else like that, I'm going to say, "Well, that's too bad. Goodbye then." Just like the robot and Ripley. So I'm going to go into my look blocks and code for that. Grab my say hello for 2 second block and change the text to, "Well, that's too bad. Goodbye then," for 4 seconds. And then I'm going to hide. So I'm going to grab my hide block. I'm going to change my backdrop back to the spaceship. So switch backdrop to, and drop down to the spaceship backdrop. And lastly, I'm going to run all my options again. So I'm going to broadcast my options message in the event blocks, broadcast, and drop down to broadcasting the options message. So that we coded for what happens if the player says no. But if we say yes, then we're going to start our robot charging game, and that's going to be a new broadcast message. So if answer is equal to yes, then we're going to broadcast. We're going to drop down to say new message, and this message is going to be called robot charging game. Also, if we say yes, I want Monet to also say, "Great, I'll go get it then." So she can go get her robot. So I'm going to grab a look block, grab that say hello for 2 seconds block. I'm going to put it before the broadcast, and I'm going to have her say, "Great, I'll go get it then. And we'll have her say that for 3 seconds. Now we're going to start coding for our robot charging game. So first we're going to need a robot. So I'm going to choose a sprite. I'm going to use my search bar up top in the corner, and this time I'm just going to search up robot. And we have 2 different robots. So we've already used the space robot to the right over here. So I'm just going to use this retro robot for our charging game. So I'm going to click on that, and I'm going to have the robot start just in the middle right over here. And I'm going to code for this robot first by going to my event blocks. When my green flag is clicked block, I'm going to make sure the robot is hidden at the very beginning of the game. And then I'm going to grab my show block. And when do I want this robot to show? I want it to show when I start my robot charging game. So in my event blocks, I'm going to grab that when I receive block and put it up top. So I'm going to make sure I show up when I receive the robot charging game. So I'm going to drop down and select that message. So how this game is going to work is very similar to the very first game we had with the robot, where I had to catch stars. So instead of collecting stars, I'm going to have to go around collecting lightning bolt charges. And I also have another part of this game where I have to avoid negative charges. So I'm going to have Monet explain the rules. So I'm going to click on Monet's sprite. I'm going to scroll down, and I'm going to code for when I receive that robot charging game message, so that when you receive that message, we're going to have her say, I'm going to grab my look block and the say hello for 2 second block. I'm going to have her say, use your arrow keys to move. And then I'm going to have her say, collect 10 bolts to fully charge my robot, but make sure to watch out for negative charges. So I'm going to change this text to use your arrow keys to move, and I'm going to have her say it for 3 seconds, and then I'm going to grab another say hello for 2 second block and have her say collect 10 bolts, so we're collecting 10 again, just like the stars, to fully charge my robot, but make sure to watch out for negative charges. And we're going to say that for 4 seconds. So those are the rules for this game. So like it says in the instructions, we're going to use our arrow keys to move. So we're going to have to code the robot to respond to our keyboard arrow keys. So if we push the up button, it'll go up, down button goes down, left button goes left, and if we push the right button, it'll go right. So we haven't done this before, but since we know how to use if statements, it should be fairly easy. So let's try to do that first. In my retro robot code, when I receive the robot charging game, I show up in my current position. So the current position is at x -17 and y -47. So I could code for that by going to my motion blocks and grabbing the go to block and putting it down here. I also forgot to do this for Monet, so I'm going to go back into Monet's code, scroll up to the beginning, and I'm going to grab that go to block again and put it right at the top when I receive my right message. Okay, going back into my robot's code. So in order for my robot to respond to the keys I push on my keyboard, the arrow keys, I'm going to have to use this new block we haven't used before in the sensing blocks area. And it's this block right here, key space pressed. So it checks here whether or not your key is pressed. So in this case, it's the space bar. But if we drop down, we are given the option of the up, down, right, and left arrow. So in this case, we want to make it so that we're coding for the robot to check to see at all times whether or not if the left arrow, the right arrow, the up arrow, or the down arrow are pushed. And if they are, then we want it to move according to which arrow is being pushed. So what that sounds like is that we'll need some if statements and also maybe a loop. So in my control blocks, I'm going to grab my if statement. So I'm going to put this key space pressed block inside of this area as the condition. So in this case, if the I'm going to drop down the up arrow is pressed, then I'm going to do whatever is inside of this if statement. So if the up arrow is pressed, I want it to move up, and that is in the Y direction in the positives. So in our motion blocks, there's actually an option to change the X and Y coordinates. So if you scroll down, the Y coordinate is the one that goes up and down. So this change Y by 10 block here changes the Y up by 10. And if I want it to go down, it would be change Y by -10. So I'm going to put, because we're going up in this case, I'm going to change the Y by 10 if the up arrow is pushed. And I'm going to put that in my code here. Similarly, I'm going to grab my if statement again. I'm going to grab another one. In this case, I want to make it so that the condition is if the down arrow is pushed. So I'm going to go into my sensing blocks and grab that same block and change it to key down arrow pressed. And if the key down arrow is pressed, I'm going to go into my motion blocks and I'm going to change my Y again, but instead of 10, I'm going to change it by -10, going in the negative down direction. So change Y by, change the number to -10. And I'm going to do this 2 more times with my left and right. And for my left and right, I'm actually, instead of changing my Y up and down, I'm changing my X left and right. So right would be the positive X direction and left would be the negative X direction. So what I need to do is I'm going to copy and duplicate this if statement. I'm going to change this to the right. I'm going to get rid of this inside here and change X by 10 instead. And then I'm going to copy it one more time, duplicate, change this to the left arrow. And then this time I'm going to change my X by -10. So I'm going to click on this just to test it out. So it looks like when I click on it, it lights up for a little bit, so it shows that it's running, but it doesn't continue running because I don't have my if statements constantly on the lookout for these arrow pushes. So what I need to do is put these all inside of a forever loop so that we're always looking for if the button is pushed or not. So in my control blocks, I'm going to grab my forever loop all around those, and then I'm going to put that back into our code. And when I click on this code now, you'll see that it's running. It's highlighted in yellow, so it's constantly running. And when I push on my arrow keys on my keyboard over here, you'll see that it does move depending on which arrow keys I push. So that is our robot coded for. I'm going to stop the code. And now we have to code for the charges and the negative charges that we're supposed to be getting and avoiding for this game. First, we're going to have to get sprites for those positive and negative charges. So I'm going to go into the choose a sprite area here. So for our positive charge, we're going to have a lightning bolt, which I know we have available in our sprite library. So I'm just going to type in light at the top corner, and we have this lightning sprite right here. So I'm going to click on that. I'm going to change the size because right now it's pretty easy to find. So I'm going to change it to maybe around 50% of the original size. So that's a decent size. Next, we're going to have to also make a sprite for our negative charge. So I'm going to choose a sprite again. And I'm going to have to find a sprite for our negative charge. So I'm just going to scroll down and I'm going to use something simple. We're going to use this X button right here. So there is our negative charge. And I'm going to have this also at 50% of its original size. So for these two sprites, we're going to do something a bit more simple, and that's because we've already done very similar code to what we need to do to code for these. So what we want these two sprites to do is we want them to appear at a random position. We want them to, when they touch the robot, to either increase our charge or decrease our charge. So first we're going to have to make a variable to hold our charge number. So I'm in the variables section already. I'm going to click on the make a variable button, and we're going to call this variable charge. So you see the charge appears in the top left corner. So I'm going to start coding for this lightning the same way I coded for the star catching game. So in my event blocks, I'm going to grab that when green flag is clicked block. I'm also going to grab that when I receive block. In this case, I'm going to drop down to when I receive the robot charging game because that is what we are playing right now. So when the green flag is clicked, we want to hide this sprite. So in the look blocks, we don't want to see the sprite in the very beginning of our adventure game, but we do want to see it when you receive that robot charging game message. So we're going to grab our show block and put it under here. Next, just like for our star catching game, I'm going to go back into my variables and I'm going to set my charge, my new variable, to 0. Next, I'm going to have it start at a random position. So in my motion blocks, I'm going to grab my go to random position block. And then after this, I want to make it so that if I'm being touched by the retro robot here, my new sprite that I'm using for this game, then I'm going to disappear, create a clone of myself, and also add a point to my charges. So I'm going to do that by going into my control blocks, grabbing my if block, just like I did for my star catching game over here. And I'm also going to need a forever loop, so I'm always on the lookout for whether or not I'm touching my retro robot. So going back to my lightning code, I'm going to grab that forever loop and put it around my if statement. So for my if statement, my condition in this case is if it is touching the retro robot. So that is a sensing block because we're trying to see if it's touching something. And then we're going to grab that touching block and drop down so that if it is touching the retro robot, and if it's touching the retro robot, then we're going to go into my variables and change my charge by 1. So I'm adding 1 point. And also then I'm going to go into my control blocks and I'm going to create a clone of myself. And then also stop this loop. So I'm going to drop down to stop this script. And lastly, I also want to hide once the robot catches me. So I'm going to grab my hide block and put it right after I change the score or the charge. Next, I'm also going to need an if statement so that if my charge is more than 9, so that's 10 or above, then I'm going to stop the game. So in my control blocks, I'm going to grab my other if statement and put it inside of that loop, just like I did with my star catching game for the star. And in this case, if my charge is more than 9, so my operator here, I'm going to get my greater than operator, so this one right over here, put it inside my if statement, change this to if my charge is greater than 9, and grab my charge block from my variables. Then I'm going to set a new message to be broadcasted, and that message is going to be called finish charging game. So in my event blocks, I'm going to broadcast, drop down to make a new message, and my message is going to be finish charging game. I'm also then going to have my lightning bolt disappear, so I'm going to hide it. And lastly, I'm going to stop my forever loop. So that is in the control blocks, the stop block, and we want to stop only this script. Next, I'm going to code for when I start as a clone as well. And I'm going to copy all of this code, duplicate it, and move it over. And make sure that I'm not setting my charge to 0 when I start as a clone. And also, instead of hiding and stopping the script in my if statements, I'm going to get rid of the hide block. I'm going to get rid of stop this script block. And I'm going to make sure that I am deleting my clone instead of hiding and stopping. So I'm going to delete the clone right here. And I'm going to do the same down here. I'm going to get rid of these 2 blocks and delete the clone once we hit 10 charges. So right now, when I test this out, I'm going to push on the green flag. So we start at the very beginning. I haven't coded for my negative charge yet. So you see this big X in the bottom because we haven't hit it yet. But we're going to go right. We see that we're on a moon colony. We're going to meet Monet, the engineer. And then we're going to say yes to helping her charge her robot. And so she goes to get her robot. We're going to move using arrow keys. So we're going to collect 10 bolts to fully charge the robot. And so I'm going to move the robot to touch the charge, and you see that it disappears. My charge up in the top left corner goes up by 1. And then once I hit more than 9, so once I hit 10 charges, like so, I'm not going to see any more lightning bolts because I told it to stop cloning. So now I want to do the same thing for my negative charges. So I'm going to copy all of the code I have in this lightning bolt into my negative charges. But the only thing I'm going to change is that in this case, when it touches the retro robot, I wanted to change my charge by -1. So I want it to decrease. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take all of my code here. So when the green flag is clicked, I'm going to drag it into my sprite down at the bottom. Same thing with when I receive the robot charging game in here. And lastly, also with the when I start as a clone block, all this code here. And I'm dragging it into my X sprite. And now I'm going to arrange it so that we can see a little bit better. You'll see we have all 3 pieces of code that we dropped in here. And we're going to change it a little bit just in the area where it says, if touching retro robot, then we're going to change this charge by -1. And I'm going to do the same thing in the area where we start as a clone. So right here, I'm going to change the charge by -1 if I'm touching the robot. Now, when I start the robot charging game and I touch this X, I see my charge going down into the negatives. So we don't want that. We want a charge of 10. During this game, I also want Monet and Kieran to disappear. So I'm going to code for that by going first to Monet. I'm going to code for when I receive robot charging game. After she says all the instructions, I'm going to have her disappear. So I'm going to go into my look blocks and I'm going to hide. And I want her to show up again at the end of the robot charging game. So I'm going to put this show block and I'm going to grab the event that says finish robot charging game, or finish charging game for short. So after I finish the charging game, I want her to show up again. And same thing with Kieran. So I'm going to go into Kieran's code. I'm going to put the when I receive block underneath the right signal block. I'm going to drop down to when I receive the robot charging game. So once the game starts, I'm going to hide. So I'm going to grab my look block and I'm going to hide. And then back to my event blocks, because when I receive that finish the charging game signal, so this one over here, when I get that finish charging game message, I want to show up again. So in my look blocks, I'm going to grab my show block. There we go. And lastly, going back to Monet's code, at the end of the robot charging game, when I finish the charging game, I want Monet to say, "It looks like my robot is fully charged. thank you. And then we're going to go back to our spaceship again. So here, when I receive that finish charging game message, I'm going to first show up again. Then I'm going to go my look blocks, say hello for 2 seconds, and change that text to say, it looks like my robot is fully charged. And we're also going to say thank you in that same block. And we're going to say that for 4 seconds. And then we're going to disappear. So I'm going to hide. And then we're going to change the backdrop back to our spaceship backdrop. So switch backdrop to, drop down to spaceship. And lastly, we're going to run the options again. So events, broadcast, and putting my broadcast block in and changing it to broadcast options. So we're going around full circle back to the beginning. Also for our robot, our retro robot, I want to make sure that at the end of this game, all of this code stops and we get rid of the robot because we don't need it anymore once we finish the game. So I'm going to grab my when I receive block down here. And when I receive that finish charging game block, I'm just going to say hide. So in my look blocks, I'm going to hide. And then I also want to stop the scripts running in this sprite. So in my control blocks, I'm going to stop. And I'm going to drop down to other scripts in the sprite because right now we still have the forever loop up here still running until you tell it to stop. So there's one last thing we need to do before we're finished coding for this entire game, and that is we have to make sure that the charge in the top left corner of our preview window appears at the right time and disappears at the right time. So what we need to do is first at the very beginning in Kieran's code, when we receive that robot charging game, we want that charge to appear in the top left corner. So in my variables, we're gonna take that show variable charge and put it into the code when we receive that robot charging game. But when we finish the game, when we receive that finish charging game message, we want to hide that variable charge. So I'm gonna grab that hide variable charge block, put it into our code, and that should fix our code at the very end, so it disappears. So now I think we are officially done coding for our entire game. Thank you for sticking around for the 2-hour-long lessons it took to code this whole thing. And let's do a playthrough. So I'm going to stop all of our code and we're going to actually do a playthrough from the very beginning and test out all of the different elements of our game. So right now we have Kieran introducing herself, asking where we should go. Let's go to the right because we just coded for it. We see that we're on a moon colony and we meet Monet the engineer who needs help with her robot. And we're going to say no right now to test the no code. And she says, that's too bad. Goodbye then. And so we go back to our spaceship. But no, I want to try it one more time. We're going to go right again. And this time we are going to help her out. So I wonder if there's anyone else around. We see Monet again. And this time when she asks if we can help with her robot, we're going to say yes. And she's going to go get it. So now we have to use our arrow keys to move. We see the charge has appeared in the top left corner, and we see that there are 2 different types of charges available. So there's this lightning bolt one, which has our charge go up by 1, and there's this X that has our charge go down by 1. So we're going to try to avoid all the X's until we, it's a little harder than you think it is, and we're going to charge the robot up to 10. So this is the last one. And it looks like the robot is fully charged. She thanks us and we're going to go back to our spaceship. Next, we're going to go straight. So let's go straight this time. So we're in the big city and we see someone headed our way. It's Ripley and his space dog Dot. So now he's going to ask us if we can help him pack. And we're going to say no for the first time because we want to test out our no code. And that's too bad. Goodbye then. And we see that dot over here has not disappeared. So it looks like I'm going to have to fix that. So dot here. In this case, I'm going to have to make dot disappear by having it so that when we receive that options message, so the message to put up the options along the bottom here, I'm going to have dot hide. So in my event blocks, when I receive drop down to the options message, I'm going to hide. Like so. And I'm going to click on this and make her hide, so that's good. We're going to go straight again and test that out one more time. We're going to say no again to make sure our little problem has been fixed. So there's Dot and Ripley again. And we're going to say no. That's too bad. Goodbye then. And we're back to our spaceship without Dot. So that's great. And we're going to go back straight one more time. And in this case, we are going to help with packing. So when he asks us if we want to help him pack for his space adventure, we're going to say yes. And we're going to head to his room to help him pack. So he thinks he'll need food and clothes for the trip. Click on Dot when you're done. So we're going to find all of the clothing here. And then we're going to find the food here. And then we're going to click on Dot when we're done. So thank you, that looks like everything. Time to go on his space adventure. And lastly, we're going to go to the left now on our space adventure to this cool empty planet. But it isn't exactly empty because we have this robot right here who needs our help with fulfilling his spaceship with stars to fuel it. So it's going to ask us if we can help fuel his ship with stars. We're going to say no first so that we can test out that code. We're going to go left one more time. And this time we are going to help the robot. So when he asks us if we are able to help him fuel his spaceship, we're going to say yes. So yes, and we're going to try to catch all 10 stars. 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, it looks like we had a lot of stars in one cluster, so it went up to 10 really quickly. So there we go. We have all of our directions working, all of our paths working. I hope you enjoyed this lesson, and I'm going to include more lessons and more resources for learning more about Scratch. We've just barely scratched the surface. So if you are looking for more resources on how to learn coding in Scratch or maybe in Python or otherwise, I'm going to include those links in the description. So I hope you enjoyed our very last class. You were able to follow along properly. Remember, you can contact me if you had any issues with any of the code, and I'll try to explain it as clear as possible. So I hope you all have a great rest of your summer. Bye.